Alright, yeah, welcome back on into some more Magic Arena. This week, we're going to be taking a look at a mono-white monument list. So, this is kind of a mono-white creatures deck that's based around the card Oketra's Monument. 3 mana for a legendary artifact that says white creatures spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you cast a creature spell, create a 1/1 white warrior creature token with vigilance. So basically we're hoping to go very wide and then swing on through with things like Shepherd Dunes and Lord effects like Benelish Marshal to make all of our creatures super big and unable to be stopped. So it's really good at clogging up the board against our opponent and also getting around their creatures as well if their plan is just the same. Has a reasonable matchup against control and a pretty good matchup against aggro as well. Legion's Landing is very good against control, because without Field of Ruin, the Andanto the First Fort allows us to create some vampire tokens every single turn. Other than that, we got a lot of other stuff as well. So let's start at the beginning, shall we? 4 copies of Sky Marcher's Aspirant for that lovely early game start. 1 mana 2/1 with Ascend, so if we have 10 or more permanents on the field, then it gets flying for the rest of the game, which is pretty cool. So a 2/1 for 1 is very nice. After that, we've got Anointed Priest, because we will be generating a lot of tokens. We're running 4 copies of this because it does help against aggro in the early game as well. If you get an Anointed Priest down on the field and then an Oketra's Monument, every creature is going to gain you 1 life. So 1/3 is also a pretty decent blocker against a lot of early game stuff like Bomat Couriers and Kenras and things like that. And it also has an extra little bit of resilience as well with the Embalm. 3 and a white allows you to exile it from the graveyard and create a zombie token copy of itself, which actually does trigger itself as well. So along with all of the tokens, should mention as well, we're running 3 copies of Anointed Procession to go with it. So Anointed Procession is 3 and a white enchantment. If an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many tokens instead. So the Embalm off of the Anointed Priest actually creates 2 Anointed Priests. Legion's Landing would create 2 1/1 tokens. I should mention, to flip the Legion's Landing, you have to attack with 3 creatures, which is very easy for us to do as soon as turn 2, so that's pretty cool. Or have the 3 creatures anyway on turn 2, and then turn 3 swing in. We get the land, we've got 4 mana, and we can play it like a Procession or something like that. But yeah, creating tokens is kind of cool. It's kind of the plan of the deck as well. So Monument creates 2 1/1 warriors at that point. Karn's -2 creates 2 constructs, which is what I like to call them. And Angel of Invention's Fabricate generates 4 servos, which combos very nice with the constructs as well. After that, though, we also have Knight of Grace, very good against control as well. For 1 and a black, do 2, first strike, and hexproof from black. So it's mainly the black control decks, so Esper control and blue-black control. Getting a Knight of Grace that can be a 3/2 first striker is enough to stop a lot of things in the format, especially against like mono black control and things like that. There's a lot of creatures that this stops, and it's very hard to deal with. They need to pretty much wipe their own board to get through. Benelish Marshal is 3 white mana for a 3/3 that gives other creatures you control +1/+1. Speaks for itself, really. We play this guy down, we generate some tokens, we end up going wide. After that, we've got 2 copies of Cast Out as our main board answers to Teferis and fellow Cast Outs as well. If they're Ixalan's Binding, like our Benelish Marshal or something like that, it really sucks. But it also, if we don't need to use it, it does have the extra added benefit of having cycle with the white mana there, so if we don't need it, we throw it away. If we need to get our land drop for the turn or something like that, we can also cycle it to go hunt for that kind of thing. 2 Settler Wreckages in the main board as well, just in case our opponent ends up swinging at us through with their aggressive start, because of course we can clog up the board, but we're not always going to be doing that, so having the Settler Wreckages as a little backup plan. 2 and 2 white for an instant speed. Exiles all attacking creatures target player controls, and then they get to search the library for that many basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield. This can kind of end games if you're up against red deck wins. If they've played out their entire board and you settle it in one go, they get a lot of basics, but they're at top decks at that point. And against top decks, you know, we get our 1 creature at a time, which can probably beat their 1 creature, and if it can't, we usually have some token that just chumps all the way there. Saram's Expertise is really nice as well. So you might be thinking to yourself, with this deck, that Chain Whirler is a problem. And while it is still technically a problem, Saram's Expertise does have a nice little combo with things like the Benelish Marshal. So a lot of our 1/1s will die to Chain Whirler, which deals 1 damage to each of our creatures, but Sram's expertise is 2 and 2 white for a sorcery that says create 3 1/1 servo artifact creature tokens, and then you may cast a card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. What we want to be hitting is Benelish Marshal, because Sram's expertise into Benelish Marshal creates 3 2/2s instead, and that survives the Chain Whirler, so they need the answer for the Marshal plus the Chain Whirler in order to wipe our board there. When I was first building this deck, I went up in Quick Constructed just to test it out, and went 7-0, and 4 of those games were against red deck wins that were running Chain Whirlers. So I can guarantee you that this deck can win through a Chain Whirler. It's not the oppressive meta that really stops this deck at all, so that's pretty good for that one. 2 Karn, Scion of Urzas. They're usually the card that I end up boarding out, but he does have quite the place in this deck all the same, I think. 4 mana for a 5 loyalty planeswalker. You can tick him up to reveal the top 2 cards of your library. An opponent chooses one of them, and then you put that card into your hand and exile the other with a silver counter on it. Usually your opponent's going to give you the worst card, which is a land quite a lot of the time. But hitting our land drops is not usually a bad thing all the same, so it's still card advantage nonetheless. If he does not give us one of the good cards as well, the -1 allows us to put a card we own with a silver counter on it from exile into our hand. Karn doesn't have to be the specific Karn that exiled the card in order to get it back as well, because the silver counter keeps track of all the cards that Karn has removed from our deck. So if the first Karn goes down and you play the second, you can -1 immediately and go get whatever card still is in exile as well. The -2, though, is the beast of this particular deck. So -2 says create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. While we don't run too many artifacts, we do run a Ketra's Monument, which means Karn makes 2/2s. We also run Anointed Procession, which means he creates 2 construct tokens, which will then be 2/2s on their base if we don't have the monument. And we also have Angel of Invention as well, which generates the tokens. I've managed to have Karn's construct tokens be around 12/12s before. In addition to all of the Lord effects and the servos, he can actually create a hell of a lot of horrible little tokens. So I really do like having him in the main board, but most of the time I end up boarding him out and trimming the top end of the deck to go for a more aggressive approach. Depends on the matchup, of course, but finally we have the Angel of Invention. Adding to our Lord effects, we have a total of 7 different creature lords in this deck as well. So Angel of Invention gives other creatures you control +1/+1, but also has Flying Vigilance and Lifelink, which is kind of relevant, and Fabricate 2, which means you can either choose to put 2 counters on the Angel, which I would almost always never recommend. There are obviously situations where you would do that, but the tokens put her in a position where she can get lightning struck, and she doesn't really block too many flyers in the format, so creating the tokens and going wide, which is basically creating 2 2/2s, is a lot better, because it synergizes with Karn, synergizes with token generators, synergizes with Anointed Priest, lots of life gain there. You'll end up gaining probably more life from the tokens coming into play than you will the Angel with the lifelink. Other than that, though, we are running 1 copy of Scavenger Grounds, just as a little bit of main board hate for graveyards. It's kind of nice if you're up game 1 against blue-white control or blue-black control, because you can stop their Search for Escanters or their Scarab God's main board. It's a nice little bit. We can't really run too many colourless lands, though, because Benelish Marshal needs to be hit on turn 3 quite a lot of the time. The 3 white mana is kind of painful. So in that case, we actually have 17 planes and 4 copies of Sheffet Dunes as our only non-basic land. Adds colourless mana, but we can also pay 1 life to add a white. Can be a little bit painful, but a lot of the time, Anointed Priest is generating us tokens, so even if we are paying the white to play a creature, we get the life back from the Anointed Priest. It's nice like that. It ends up being a little bit neutral. The effect that we really want it here for, though, is kind of another Lord effect, if you could say like that for the turn. You sacrifice a desert, and creatures you control get +1/+1 until the end of the turn, and you can only activate it as a sorcery. So it's basically another way of having a Benelish Marshal in play for a turn, allowing you to swing with your ultra-wide board and cause a lot of horrible, horrible blocks for our opponent. So that's the main board. Onto the sideboard. I do want to make a few changes to this list. I think one Invoke the Divine going down and one Solemnity in place for Sorcerer's Spyglass is probably a fine idea. Sorcerer's Spyglass will allow you to name Teferi, which is obviously a big problem in the format right now. I did have Solemnity in here against Green-Black Constrictor because I did see quite a lot of it. It says that players can't get counters, so it shuts off energy, but also counters can't be placed on artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or lands. So Constrictor is basically completely out of the game if a Solemnity hits the field. The Invoke the Divines are here for Torrential Gear Hulks and also against red-black aggro because they do run Heart of Kirans and Scrap Heap Scroungers. So not only are we taking power off of the board when we use Invoke the Divine, but we also gain 4 life at the same time. Cast Outs to take care of pretty much anything. It's the catch-all in the sideboard. And yet again, if we don't end up needing it, we have the cycling there. 2 copies of Settle the Wreckage, just in case our opponent is playing a more aggressive deck than us, which is still quite possible, despite the fact that we have a lot of 1/1s in this deck. Tocatli Honor Guard to take care of Godpharaoh's gift-ish kind of effects. It says creatures entering the battlefield don't cause abilities to trigger, so we can get rid of Ravenous Chupacabras and things of that sort. A lot of the time, like Champion of Wits and things like that. If they're having some sort of graveyard interaction or it's like mono black control, there's a lot of enter the battlefield effects. So I thought running 2 Honor Guards is kind of nice. It's also an extra creature as well for the Ketra's Monument, ends up being a 1-mana creature with quite a nice little effect, and a 1/3 is a decent blocker as well. And finally we have Silent Gravestone. 1 mana, cards in graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities. So this shuts off Liliana, this shuts off Scarab God, and it shuts off Torrential Gear Hulks as well, because they can't target instants in the graveyard as long as Silent Gravestone is in the field. So hits a lot of things in the graveyard. Doesn't stop Godpharaoh's Gift, because how does it? Cards in graveyards can't be the target of spells or abilities. Actually, maybe it is. Yeah, maybe I'm wrong. Either way, though, even if it's not, it has a secondary ability. 4 mana to tap it, exile Silent Gravestone and all cards from all graveyards to draw a card. So if we draw an extra one, then we can 5 mana cantrip, which is obviously not the greatest thing in the world, but it's also not the worst either. And yeah, it's kind of nice that way. We don't really care about our graveyard past the Anointed Priest, so losing our graveyard is not really a problem at all. So that's going to be the deck, guys. I do hope you enjoy. I'm going to change up the format for this week's videos as well. I quickly realised that a single competitive constructed queue was probably not going to be enough, just in case maybe I O2'd. I need to be making like specifically 4 videos every week for you guys. It's 3 matches for you guys and then 4 for the Patreon. So I'm going to be doing 2 leagues, trying to get the best highlights out of the deck and out of the matchups. Get a nice little bit of variety because 90% of the games are blue-white control, and I don't ever want to see that deck ever again if I can help it, so I'd rather you guys didn't see it either because it's not fun and no one likes it. So there you go. If you did enjoy the deck anyway and you want to see the matchups, there'll be a link right at the end of the video. And other than that, like, subscribe, share the video if you like the video, and hit that little bell icon and you'll get notifications when future videos go live. And I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.